Okay.
Hello,
Hello.
how are you?
Fine. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. I am just so pleased we can do it. So,
Wonderful. Can you maybe start with your background? How did you get into somatics?
how much time do you want me to spend on that? How did I get into somatics? Well, I've always been interested in the body. And prior to getting into somatics, I was very interested in yoga and interested in biofeedback and body's responses to certain experiences. So I met Thomas Hanna at the University of Florida when he was chair of the philosophy department, and I was working on my doctorate in the College of Education. And I was very interested in existentialism as part of humanistic psychology. I've always been a humanistic psychologist. And he was also involved with existentialism. So at some point, I met him there.
Mhm.
And I became interested in his work, and I became interested in his writing more than he had written. Because a colleague, another graduate student, told me that he would probably never, Thomas would probably never write another book, that he would rest on his laurels, he would only write one book. And so I felt that was a shame. Went to see him and I told him, I said, you must not write only one book.
In which book was this? Had he written?
I think it must have been The Lyrical Existentialist,
Okay.
actually his dissertation.
Hmm.
He had really also already written a book called The Thought and Art of Albert Camus.
Hmm.
So it wasn't really his only book, but I felt that he had more to say, and that
Hmm. And
right,
you were right.
and I was right. But little did I realize at the time that I was urging him to write more books, is that I would be helping him with his
Mm.
book.
Well, there
In
you
fact,
go.
I published some of his books.
Oh,
And and also I'm keeping his books in print that go out of print. So I'm very involved with his books.
that's funny you say that because I had a very difficult time finding Bodies in Revolt.
Well, I'm sorry, where did you look? You probably looked on Amazon.
Yeah, normal places, bookstores around here don't have it.
Did you find it?
I found it. I have a really old copy. Actually, it's right here.
That is an old copy.
Yeah, and it's the only one I've found, but I have it, but it's falling apart. So,
Well, we try to keep that one in print. So
mhm.
at some point you can order it from Somatics Educational Resources.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have all of his lectures and teachings, at least a great deal of them. I got all of them from you.
All of them.
Uh-huh. Whichever ones were available.
Yeah, all of them
Hmm.
that are available and
Hmm.
that ever been available. So so Bodies in Revolt was a book that he wrote in the early 70s. I guess it was published in 1970.
Hmm.
Result of his thinking in the realm of the philosophy of the body. So he became interested. He was a person who believed in living your philosophy. He was a real philosopher.
Hmm.
What I mean by that is that he was philosophizing all the time. He
Hmm.
was originating, he was reflecting, he was, unlike some philosophers who teach other people's philosophy, originating philosophy. And so Bodies in Revolt was more philosophical, but it was sort of pointing toward practice,
Hmm.
pointing toward using that information in your life. The book Bodies in Revolt is more timely now than it was then. It was
I agree.
absolutely very timely now.
Hmm.
It was very prescient. He did not think of himself that way, but as it turns out, he is and was. So because of meeting him and talking with him and wanting him to write more, he and I began a dialogue, and I would bring him books from psychology and research from psychophysiology and stuff that complemented the things that he was thinking about. So we developed a dialogue which lasted throughout the rest of his life, more or less. And so as his thinking began to grow along the lines of what came to be called somatics, I was right there with him, hand in hand with him. So he and I attended a professional seminar given by Moshe Feldenkrais in the early 1970s. And Thomas was so impressed with what Moshe was doing with people individually and also in groups that he wanted to study with him. So he couldn't go to Israel to study with him. He decided to create a training program for him here. So he would bring him over, set up the class, and then Thomas studied with him, along with something like 65 other people. And then he became a functional integration practitioner, Thomas did. He and I created the Novato Institute for Somatic Research and Training, where he practiced functional integration for about 15 years. As he did, his work began to change, and it became something similar, but in certain ways quite different. And so I was with him the whole way. Part of what he added to what came to be called somatics was understandings from biofeedback. And biofeedback was a field that I had been involved with since the beginning of the field. And so part of our discussions would be about biofeedback. So when he named somatics, he discussed it with me because he was getting ready to name his new magazine journal, Somatics, the magazine journal of the bodily arts and sciences. And he asked me one day, what do you think of the name somatics? And I said, well, let me think about it. And so I went off for the day to teach and thought about it. And when I came home, I said, I think that would be a good idea. So I've been thinking about it and so forth and so on. So he took the term somatic, soma, the Greek word for the living body. That's usually used in English just to refer to body. So somatic without an S.
Right.
The somatic nervous system, for example.
Right.
But Thomas added an S to it, which makes it into a noun, and he used it to name the field of the mind-body disciplines. So somatics refers to an integrated mind-body system. Some people would like to add in spirit, but Thomas wasn't thinking along those terms.
There's so much confusion over this word.
Yeah. So that's how I got involved with somatics. Sort of was very closely involved with it from its origins and before. So what are the confusions you are seeing in it?
Okay, so I just as you know, I was in the Alexander world, and they staunchly are not somatic. They'll tell you. And I try to say, well, based on Thomas Hanna, but who's Thomas Hanna? So for them, the somatic is, so because, Alexander was saying sensation, we don't go with our sensation, but he's saying habit. And so what you do is you create the movement in your mind and you project it into the body. And so it's almost like they're saying a disembodiment. I still need to probe some teachers for that to go deeper into their understanding, but they really have a hard time with this world, and they see themselves as separate because of that word. But but when they describe the technique, it's very much what Tom's saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we consider them part of somatics.
Right. We consider them. Yeah, I do as well.
That's all right.
Yeah.
They don't have to consider themselves part of somatics, but people can appreciate their work nevertheless.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. If they know about it, it seems to be such a, they're just not aware. The Feldenkrais people are, obviously, with the connection, Tom bringing Moshe over for the first time, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the people in the know in that world all seem to know Tom on some level.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some
Mm-hmm.
appreciation there, but it doesn't seem to ring out too much further than that, at least in my experience thus
Mm-hmm.
far.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Someday it will.
Well, yeah, I think. Well, I think, like you said, it's more important now in some ways. It's more prescient now.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was ahead of his time for sure.
he was. He
Mhm.
was. And when you're ahead of your time, you don't necessarily know you're ahead of your time. You
Yeah.
think you're part of your time.
Yeah,
Just don't seem to be hearing you very well.
more frustration than appreciation that you're ahead of your time.
Yeah, yeah. Because so I have the experience. I tend to be ahead of my time. And so I've been involved with some things many years before they become worldwide phenomena. So I have this thought of, I see something that needs to be. I get all dressed up and ready to go, and I look out there and I say, where is everybody?
Yeah.
Is everybody? And the thing is, they're not here yet. So I can say, oh, shoot, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but
Yeah.
it is that they're not here yet. They will be here. They will be coming, but they're not here yet. So I reach the point where I'm not too disappointed about it. Because sometimes I'm very aware of how very good whatever it is. And from my life experience, I know that it will spread.
Right. Well, and then there's the whole question of, like, what is it? How do you explain what this is?
Yeah. Well, you're right, because it's many things. It's
Mhm.
much more than we even know it is, for
Right.
example.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that.
Yeah. We really, for example, I was working with a little boy in India on Zoom with his mother and with a colleague who does somatics in India. And so I heard a little, well, she attended a webinar that I gave in India a couple of weekends ago, and he asked her to talk about the responses of her son and what she's noticed since he's been doing his somatic work. And when she described all the changes, that he eats better, he sleeps better, he's not afraid, he's uh, plays longer, and this litany of things that cover just about everything in life. And you realize how very holistic it is.
Right.
You can look at it one way, but my gosh, there are many other aspects of it at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes these things get put into this category of like health and wellness, and I think that's too small.
Yeah.
It's much broader than that.
Yeah. Yes. And actually, I experienced many times people will say, my life was transformed. I was just working with a gentleman. He's quite amazing. He's older, I guess somewhere in his 80s, maybe late 80s. And he has been moving very slowly, but he came in just whipping around today.
Mm.
I have to warn his wife that he's going to become faster, because
Yeah.
when you're to a person being slow, and all of a sudden they're moving around really quickly,
Mhm.
you can trip over each other, or something, you can misjudge something
Yes.
because of this expectation. So
Oh, that's interesting you say that. I worked with a client one time who I was doing somatics with them, and they hadn't been running for a while, and then they went out on a run and they
yeah.
got injured.
Ooh.
They stepped off a curb
Uh-oh.
and caught it funny because they were really exuberant about being able to run again
I
and missed
know.
the curb. And I felt kind of responsible. I didn't know. I was like, well, was I should have told him to take it easy. It didn't even occur to me. So I know what you mean. I think that's a similar example.
Yeah, no, it is. And now it can occur to you.
Yeah, now it's since occurred to me.
So that you can warn people, and like you may notice that you're running faster than you ever did before, and you might misstep. So you want to be
Proprioception.
careful.
Yeah.
For example, when we're working with horses, if a person rides a horse that has been worked with somatically, they need to know they might have more of a horse, quote unquote, had previously.
Yeah.
Horse is not as restricted by contracted muscles and may be feeling more exuberant and so forth.
So since we brought up the Feldenkrais technique, and you said he worked with the technique and then he developed it into his own thing, can sort of suss out the nuances there, like how is Hanna Somatics different from the larger field of somatics or Feldenkrais technique? Or
Very good question. So, so just to explain, when Thomas was working with clients, he began to notice, as you know from your studies of it, some characteristic postures. Lots of people coming in bent over, like this gentleman I was just working with, bent over in what he came to call the red light posture.
Mhm.
And some people had very arched backs, were super upright and very, very much an arched back. And some people kind of tilted to the side, maybe tilted differently to each side.
Mhm.
And they were over and over again those postures. So he began to develop techniques for working with those different postures, helping people come back to symmetry and being able to be upright and moving easily and comfortably and so forth. So that's one of the things he ran into. He also, as he worked, began to discover things that worked better or faster. So he developed a technique which he called pandiculation, which is named after what animals do when they contract a whole muscle group and then slowly relax out of it, such as the famous downward dog. Dogs, cats, horses, all of them will do a arched back, extended legs, and so forth, and then slowly come out of it. Developed a technique in which he's asking people to contract a muscle group, always with movement, not just contracting, because that's an isometric exercise, if you will, and the person doesn't relax very much after they come out of it, as much as they feel they are relaxing, because the neuromuscular spindles are still in there being contracted by part of the nervous system. So he began to bring in more of what he called pandiculation, and he had protocols for working with those particular postures. He wasn't rigid about them, but he would bring in some of those same maneuvers with people with the same kinds of postures. So his sense of it was that he wanted the person to be doing it. He had a strong humanistic psychology background, which I helped introduce him to. And so he felt it should be person centered. The person, rather than the practitioner, being the most active participant, so that the person would change levels of brain control to the part of the brain that could actually change the muscle contraction levels. So there are 4 motor tracks that begin in the brainstem, and they can only contract your muscles. They can bring you up against gravity, the vestibulospinal tract. They can help you bend your joints, the cerebrospinal tract. They can get you ready for anything that's going to happen, the reticulospinal tract. Those are all kind of automatic. If they get triggered, they will do their thing. They will extend your extensors. If you're coming up against gravity, you'll stand up against gravity. So he discovered that if you ask the motor cortex to do the contraction and the relaxation, you can get more of a change in the baseline muscle contraction levels. It helped people take control of their muscles again. So he coined the phrase sensory motor amnesia to enable when your muscle is being contracted for you, you don't know that's happening. All you know is either you hurt or you can't move very well. And so he discovered that in working with thousands of clients who came to see him. And so his work changed quite a bit. So there are people in the world who don't realize that his work is different from Feldenkrais' work. It comes from that lineage, but it uses different techniques. It has some of the same goals, some of the same awarenesses, but it is a different practice. So as he developed it, then he wanted to pass it on to others. And at that point, he named it. And he had to name it Hanna Somatic Education because he could not trademark it as just somatic education because it's too generic.
Right.
He put his name on it. And that's why it's called Hanna Somatic Education. Some people think that that is just Feldenkrais with another name. It's really very different. In this case, the client is the practitioner. The practitioner is guiding, providing resistance, support, giving feedback, doing all sorts of things to support the work of the client, resetting resting level of muscles.
Yeah, I was never confused over the 2 techniques being the same. I saw the differences immediately, at least to me, it was apparent.
Yeah.
Hannah's somatic education seems more targeted.
It's very targeted. It's much
Yeah.
more targeted.
Yeah.
It's much more clinical in a way.
Right. And there's still much confusion over what the Feldenkrais technique is. All the teachers have different understandings of it, and like nobody could actually do what Moshe was able to do. It was like almost magic. He would just come in, it was like, oh, because of his martial arts background or whatever, he brought something extra that he was never truly able to explain.
Right.
Yeah,
It's really true.
where I feel like Tom's work was much clearer in application.
Mm-hmm. And Thomas really, and I call him Thomas because that's my personal name for him.
Yeah.
Some people might think that's his formal name, but for me, it's his personal name, his private name, his familiar name. But anyway, he very much wanted people to understand what was happening. He didn't want anything to be a mystery. He wanted the person to know the principles so they could then do it with themselves. And many people who have gone through these kinds of sessions really do become their own somatic educators. They can take care of almost anything that happens to them. And that's so comforting because if they go on a trip somewhere and something happens to them, they know what to do right there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be crippled through this trip to India. I
Yeah.
can resolve whatever it is myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a kind of agency or confidence that comes with that knowing.
There is. It makes people very confident
Mm-hmm.
because prior to knowing that, they feel totally vulnerable. They feel at the mercy of whatever happens, and can I get help? And it's very empowering to know how to take care of yourself for most situations.
Yeah. And it sounds like, so we were talking about these motor tracks at the brainstem and then the prefrontal cortex. It's
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
what's happening to me is a mystery. Why is this happening to me?
Yeah.
Versus becoming conscious of it and
Uh,
slowly recognize, oh, I am doing something and I can choose to do something else.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And when you're in that kind of state that you're describing, it's scary. Oh my gosh, something's happened to me.
Mhm.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
Oh goodness, it could be that.
right,
No, it's just a contracted muscle.
right. And
And
that's
I
so interesting what you say, like something's happening to me
can,
rather than I'm doing something. I'm just not aware I'm doing something. I can stop doing it and choose to do something different.
yeah, yeah. And one of my students in a class that I taught today said that she she had some very tight muscles, and she realized that she was making the tight muscles by being anxious about things and so forth. But it's not something being done to me. I am doing it to myself.
Yes,
Therefore, I can decide not to do it.
right. So that leads us into this. So now we're open the door into, well, what does that mean in this idea of embodiment, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be, you if you become your own doctor per se,
Mm-hmm.
or
For many,
therapist or whatever,
yeah.
what's the door by which you do that? So with this orientation, this idea of embodiment, I guess is what I'm asking you about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot about that. I like to think that we are embodied beings, that we are beings who happen at this moment to be embodied. And that it enables us to do things in the world that we couldn't do if we were not embodied. It is a period, we have a lifetime, whatever length that is, that we can engage with the world being embodied. So there are many people in the world who, several things here. One, some of them are prisoners of their bodies.
Mhm.
Their bodies are contracted all over the place, they're in pain, they can't move very well, they think of themselves as clumsy, etc., all sorts of things. And that can be changed, and some of it can be changed quite quickly. Um, some people are not in their bodies because of trauma and other things. They have chosen to dissociate from their bodies. And so the good news is they weren't there for the very scary thing that was happening. The bad news is they are not there to protect themselves situations because they are not in their bodies. Some people go out of their bodies frequently when they get scared. So something happens that scares them, and whoops, they're out of their bodies. And their bodies are moving around, and they're in the situation doing things much as they would, but they are not fully present.
Right. I just wanted to make the distinction. So we're talking disembodied and embodied. What's the distinction? So if somebody's listening to this, or well, what do you mean? How do I know if I'm embodied?
Yeah, how do you know? Well, you kind of feel more connected with your
Mhm.
body when you're embodied. So in somatics, we practice a lot being mind body integrated. So when you're paying attention to these sensations generated by movements in your body, at that point, you are mind-body connected.
Okay. So it's the sensations is kind of like the doorway.
Yeah, what's the connection?
Yeah.
And if you are not feeling any sensations, um, your sensory cortex becomes less developed. That is, the neurons in that part of the brain become smaller. The dendrites become smaller. The dendritic spines atrophy and disappear. And you cannot sense as much about your body or what it's doing in the world because you don't have the sensory, you don't have the functional sensory receptors, and you don't have the neurons in the sensory cortex to receive and process the sensations. And sometimes that's handy. If you're in a situation that's probably very difficult, it's very handy not to be fully present. But you miss a lot in life in not being fully, and that can be developed with somatics and other practices, again, to be more embodied.
That was my next question. How far can we take this embodiment? There's levels, I guess, for lack of a better.
Absolutely true. And how far can we take it? Who knows? It could be incredibly vast what we
Yeah.
can becoming, the levels and levels and levels embodied. And so some of our wise persons, Tibet and in India, many other countries, have practiced and explored and put together all sorts of techniques for increasing the capacities of our bodies. Tremendous amount of discoveries along those lines that we are only beginning in modern science to explore and discover. What are they doing and how does it work and is it useful and various things. So yes, no, we can look forward to a future of developing more and more aspects of ourselves.
Yeah, and I feel like this is a big topic that has momentum these days. I feel like there is definitely a push. The general public seems to be moving away from just fitness. They want a little more.
Mhm.
Yeah, so even so, for instance, I do standing meditation. So I do Qigong, Neijing practices. And one of the instructions is, you trace the body, and anywhere you're not feeling clearly, then you can brush that part of the body or cup and hit to bring some, then go back and listen. These are all
Mm.
ways to increase embodiment from that particular practices.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you have in your life developed yourself enormously with your different explorations and meditations. And,
That's the hope.
well, yeah, well, you have. But there's more.
Yeah, I say this to myself all the time. I'm like, I don't see an end to this. I don't think there's an end. It needs
No.
to just continue moving in this direction.
It's true.
But
So go ahead.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's only an end if you determine there's an end.
If you decide to stop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. No more.
Yeah. And I don't know why you would do that.
Right.
I don't see the attraction there.
Right. I don't either. But there's certain personalities that tend to do that. They
Oh, really?
tend, yeah. This is all. This is all I want. This is as far as I'm going. I'm stopping right here. There are personalities like that.
I could.
And there are people who are more open and to their experiences. And go ahead.
Yeah. I was just saying, I think I could see that at the beginning, like if somebody just came for an injury or something, and then they got what they wanted. But I feel like if you've done this for a while, perhaps, but wouldn't make sense to me.
No. So, but certain personalities that will resolve the particular issue, pain or movement difficulties, whatever. And they'll say, that's it. I'm not, that's enough. So I just need to be pain-free and go
Hmm.
on with my job and my role and whatever. They are just like that.
Sure.
It's a personality. But many people, once they open that door, they say, oh, wow, I could, it's just so delicious. Why not keep developing? Because it's so much fun. There's so many more things that you can do.
Yeah, and it's endless. There's all these different layers. It's a whole different world of exploration.
Mm-hmm.
You take it with
It
you,
is.
like you said, traveling, just everywhere you go, it's with you. It's there to continue working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And everything contributes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The word in Tibetan for Buddhist practitioner, they don't have this word Buddhist, but the word in Tibetan Nangla means insider.
Oh,
Means to
nice.
turn the attention in, not out. You don't
Mhm.
direct the attention externally. You turn the attention in. That's the demarcation of a practitioner.
Lovely.
We
Yeah.
have this word embodied, but we got that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Really nice. Well, the Tibetan discoveries are vast
Hmm.
and you exploring them.
So let me ask you a couple more questions about the pandiculation. So the pandiculation's quite it's an art form too, something to be developed, just like with the embodiment. These two go hand in hand.
Yes, I
So
think so.
when you're pandiculating, are we pandiculating specific like muscle groups, like a specific muscle or appendage, or is it a whole body pattern, or both?
Both.
Both.
And also you can pendiculate many things. You can pendiculate emotions, for
Mhm.
example, or other similar things that are not like a muscle group that you are pendiculating.
Yeah, okay, now let's pause there. What do you mean by that? You have to explain that.
Okay, sometimes when I have done psychotherapy,
Mhm.
and I am, as you know, a
Mhm.
psychotherapist, we're exploring a topic. The person says, I really need to quit my job. I just can't stand this job. And so we say, I'm very stressed with it. And so we say, okay, well, what's that going to be like for you? Let's explore it.
Mhm.
And and we sort of amplify it. Okay, we're not going to do that job anymore. We're going to do whatever we're going to do. And then we're going to, how about we can move to another city and we can, various ways you can amplify this as you're talking about it. And then the person will begin to say, well, maybe I don't really want to move to another city. Um, and actually, I really am enjoying this job. There's certain if I just change certain parts of it, and so from this extreme, you back off on it until it comes into another understanding. So
Mhm.
maybe the person doesn't stay in the job. They say, I really need to leave this job, but I think I need to do something a little bit, whatever, closer to home or closer to my skill set or, in some way. So when you're working with the chronically contracted muscle group, um, what you do is with a movement, and always has to be with a movement, never to forget that it includes a movement. So, for example, some people, as they're sitting at desks and so forth and so on, will get a very tight muscle, the supraspinatus. It will get tight and exquisitely painful. So they rub their shoulders and they do various things. But the thing is, you can pendiculate the supraspinatus. And what you do is you go into the movement. So the supraspinatus, as it contracts, it pulls the arm bone or the humerus up into the shoulder joint so that you can then use the deltoid. It's a very important part of moving your arm. So what you're going to do then is contract it a little bit more than it's already contracted, and then slowly let it decontract, decrease the output to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes to another level of contraction. So you can pandiculate different parts of the body to reset the resting level of the muscles, or you can do the whole body. So you go into as we do with yawning. Yawning is a pandiculation.
Mm-hmm.
In Hanna Somatics, we're doing what we call a voluntary pandiculation. And that is your use your voluntary motor cortex to contract the muscle group.
Mm-hmm.
Ordinarily, it's reflex. It's a polysynaptic reflex.
Mm-hmm.
All vertebrates do it. And they do it when they've been sleeping. They do it when they've been eating. They do it when they begin to feel better after they've been sick. And the foals do it about 50 to 80 times a day, different parts of their bodies. And they do it less and less as they get older. So, so that's what pandiculation is. It's a voluntary contraction of a muscle group and then a voluntary inhibition of the contraction, which allows the muscle to relax. And then you have more control over it. You cannot, a muscle gives you its force when it does a fresh contraction.
Mm-hmm.
If it is already almost 100% contracted, it cannot give you its force. It is almost like trying to drive faster when your foot is on the gas on the floorboard.
Right.
You can't go any faster. You don't have any reserve to bring in. You don't have any more motor units to bring in to contract the muscle.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're doing is backing off on the contraction level, and then you can contract it as
Mm-hmm.
needed.
Just the fact that the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The more refined you get. And as a practitioner, the more refined your sense of it is.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're first beginning, it's kind of it's rougher or less controlled than it is as you develop and get better at it.
Right. And so does the pandiculation always directed towards the pain or towards the lack of sensation?
Good. It's not it's not toward the pain, but it free or so it can be pain or restricted movement of the
Mm-hmm.
two focuses, if you will, or foci. So you're not aiming at the pain, you're aiming at the things that are contributing to the pain.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you have sciatica, frequently it is a contracted piriformis muscle that is pressing on the sciatic nerve, creating the pain. So you want to reset the resting level of the piriformis by one of two ways. One, contract it and then slowly decontract it. So when you're contracting, you do a concentric contraction and then you slowly do an eccentric contraction.
And your mind needs to be in that situation as you're eccentrically contracting out.
It has to be there. Otherwise, you're going to turn it over to the cerebellum.
Mm-hmm.
And the cerebellum is going to do a great job of doing the movement, but it does not have the connections to relax the muscle.
Mm-hmm.
It does not synapse on little inhibitory interneurons, causing there to be a decrease in activation of the neurons for the muscle.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, your mind absolutely has to be there. You cannot do it robotically.
Right. I know when I first got introduced to the technique, I would want to go in really hard. So if I felt pain, I would go into that pain and like contract it to the full degree and then try to release.
Mm-hmm. The problem with that, which you probably discovered, is that as you try to release it, it doesn't release.
Right.
Because the activation of those motor units is still taking place. The little neuromuscular spindles are still being contracted.
And why is this?
Why is it? Because as you have done this forceful contraction, what you started is still happening. Cannot. It takes a while to come away from that.
Right.
The contraction. And what you want is to contract the muscle enough that you can then decontract it, have as a result a less contracted muscle.
So it's not a forceful technique. You're not increasing more pain to get rid of pain.
No, we try to avoid pain.
Mm-hmm.
If we run into pain, it's a really good clue about which muscles are involved, but you're not looking for it.
Right.
If you find it, then that's useful information. It's another muscle group that we now need to pandiculate.
Right. But maybe you work around it or at a gentler level.
Mm-hmm. Because we really don't want to create the pain or recreate the pain.
Right. Well, and a lot of people who are disembodied, pain's one of the only times they.
Oh, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. That's the only time I know I'm alive. And that's why some people choose very risky things to do,
Mm-hmm.
choose very violent things to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's when they can feel their bodies.
Right. Well, I see this a lot with in my background where I'm working with athletes. You know, the levels of pain they feel are just normal. It's part with what you do. You know, you're lifting weights or running or hitting a heavy bag, whatever. This is just the day in and day out.
Mm-hmm.
But the subtlety, so almost they disembody to endure more pain.
Yeah.
To get through the event or whatever. I heard one time an Ironman said, you stand on the starting line that day, you look down the line, you say, well, who's going to be able to withstand the most pain today? And that's who wins the race. Like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
So then somebody like that would come to somatics and to pandiculate, and they're going to bring that attitude with them. And that would be a misunderstanding of the technique. They're going to have to get softer.
Yeah. Yeah, and more refined in what they're doing. So some of them will discover that for themselves. They will go in, they won't, in the session, they won't do that because the practitioner will guide them away from it, like less force here.
Right.
In this case, less is more. But at home, they may say, I think I really need to give it my maximum contraction. What's going to make the difference?
Yeah.
And then they discover, first of all, that it leaves them in pain. They discover, I couldn't relax the muscle as much when I took it past. And also, one of the things that I guide people away from all the time is when they're going into a position to not try to go too far. If the goal is to bring my elbow toward my knee, I might want to get my elbow on my knee, no matter what. But
Right.
as they do that, they will stretch the opposing muscles and trigger the stretch reflex, and those muscles will recontract. In Hanna Somatics, we try not to trigger the stretch reflex because it's like one step forward and two steps back. If to release the muscles abdominally by stretching your back muscles and then having them recontract is not very helpful. So you will stretch some things sometimes, but we try to avoid stretching them. If you want to lengthen a muscle, the best way to do it is to contract it and then slowly come away from it. And then you have a lengthened muscle that is not ready to recontract right away.
So this is, somebody needs to be guided. So it truly is Hanna Somatic Education.
It truly is.
Yeah, there, you need to be guided through. You need to learn about it and continue to work with it and develop it. It's like a Tai Chi or Qigong. You move slow, be mindful, and it'll develop over time.
Right. And yeah, so learning the principles, and it really is, the more I do this over the years, the more aware I am of myself as a somatic educator.
Right.
Because many people do not know much about their bodies. They don't know how our bodies work. They have all sorts of misconceptions about how they work. And so you're helping them learn some really important things that can help them stay healthy, be pain-free, appreciate their bodies more, and not age as quickly, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. But it truly is a big technique. And I think you need a good teacher and be committed to the practice and give it a daily effort. Is that what you would say, daily effort? Or is this like an exercise like every other day? Is there recovery time?
Yeah, no, daily is really nice. Twice a day,
Daily.
very nice. Doing it in the morning, and it takes no time to do. So quick. Prepares you for the day, gets your body ready to do whatever it's going to be doing. But at the end of the day, resets the muscles that you started contracting during the day that you are going to play all night if you don't reset them. So because the muscles are contracted because the motor units have gotten stimulated, they shorten their muscle fibers, they recycle while their neighbors excite, shorten their muscle fibers, and recycle. And that's done over and over and over and over and over again. I mean, that's how you maintain a contraction. It's being redone over and over and over and over again. So that's going to happen all night unless you reset the resting level of your muscle. And when we go to bed at night, we wait for our muscles to relax. Well, why wait? Help reset them before you go to bed, and then you can sleep faster, better, and more deeply.
Well, and will they relax at all? Because really, relaxation is a not contracting, it's a negation.
That's right.
So you can't tell your muscles relax, relax, relax. It's not going to work.
I know. You can tell them to, but they can only do it briefly. Other motor tracks will excite them again.
So when you say some little bit at no time in the morning, no time in the evening, can you be a little more specific?
I can do the entire cat stretch series in about 10 minutes.
The cat stretch, okay. And people who are unfamiliar with that, that's in the Thomas Hanna Somatic book.
Yeah, on page 99.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
And then all the exercises are illustrated and scripted. So you know just what to do and what to pay attention to and so forth. Yeah, so you can do your own little series. I mean, you do the cat stretch, you can do a bunch of other somatic exercises that you find valuable for your particular body.
You start to become somatically conscious and engaging in these things in the morning and the evening. You showed us how to do them in a chair. You can do them standing. You can do them laying. Very adaptable.
They're very adaptable. And to different contexts. Like you can do it in the office. You can do it on the playing field. And on the airplane. All kinds of different places.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Eleanor, for joining us.
Thank you.
I
So I so appreciate your inviting me, and I'm loving talking with you about it. And I appreciate how you've been developing over the years. And